The rescuers were surprised when they finally found Rascal deep in the forest. The dog was sitting in a very large open cage, surrounded by at least 12 black vultures. That in itself was strange. But the strangest thing was that Rascal couldn't get out of his position. Only after examining the scene carefully could they understand why. Even after the group managed to free Rascal from the cage, he returned at the first opportunity. The group had to discover what caught the dog's attention. Despite the difficulties, Matt, the leader of the group, was finally able to see the cage that Rascal was sitting in front of, and only then realized what was happening. For him, everything was now beginning to take on meaning. Despite their great efforts, they were finally able to expel Rascal from there. However, the vultures also took the cage with them. What was the reason why Rascal did not want to get up from his seat? What was the location of the ancient cage deep in the forest, and why did the vultures surround it? Miriam's beloved dog, Rascal, had emerged from the woods without warning and wreaked havoc on his mistress's house. Days after Rascal's mysterious disappearance, Miriam was forced to enlist the help of the residents of her community to find the dog. Miriam was so desperate that she did everything she could to make sure Rascal returned home. After persuading Miriam, the townspeople chose to look for Rascal. Unfortunately, after many hours of searching, no trace of the dog was found. Due to the vastness of the forest, the search seemed endless, and the inhabitants began to lose hope when their hours-long search seemed to be in vain. Miriam began to wonder if her dog would ever be found, as she saw the discouragement on the faces of some searchers. Miriam stumbled upon a search party made up of some of his closest friends just as he was about to give himself up completely. Miriam's classmates tried to motivate her and showed her enthusiasm for her search. She reminded him that they had prepared supplies for a week or more. They informed him that her concern was the same as Miriam's, and that the only thing that mattered was finding Rascal, even if that meant going into the forest. The search team continued searching and fortunately, after about 2 days, found some footprints and signs of Rascal's movement in the forest. When they found footprints and skins, their hope was rekindled. However, the time the tests in the forest would take was questioned. The group tried not to get excited about the tests, but at the same time, tried to remain hopeful. Therefore, they considered the test as proof that they were on the right path to finding Rascal. They hoped to find Miriam's dog alive because they knew how much he loved him. The group persevered and searched for hours. The deeper they went into the forest, the deeper they went into it. Before they knew it, they had reached areas of the forest that had not been visited by people. There was almost nothing artificial in this area of the forest. On the 3rd day of the search, rescuers began to consider the possibility of locating him. They thought there were enough predators in the forest for Rascal to be harmed. His strength and determination to continue the search were diminished by the thoughts that were accumulating. Everyone felt that they were about to reach the limit. On the 3rd day of the search, the group received additional guidance on the next path to follow. The sign they saw was ominous rather than a neutral indication. At a specific point in the forest, the group came across black vultures moving in circles. Upon seeing the vultures, the group realized that there was a dead animal nearby that had caught the attention of the corpse-eating birds. They hoped the dead animal was a deer instead of Rascal, which they loved so much. At the same time, they believed that the dead animal that attracted the vultures must attract Rascal. Due to the many thoughts going through their heads, the group was very interested in what was going on. They were amazed when they arrived at the scene. At the site, they observed around 12 black vultures, but did not find any dead deer. The group was very curious to know what had happened at the place. The search party looked carefully and quickly spotted an old white dog cage. They wondered how such an object could be found in a deep forest given their new discovery. They didn't take the old dog cage they saw seriously, as Rascal was standing in front of the mysterious cage. After about 3 days of intense searching, they breathed a sigh of relief. Among the dozen black vultures they had previously seen, Rascal sat calmly. Rascal didn't seem to care about the vultures surrounding him. Therefore, the group tried to intimidate the vultures into approaching the dog. The group was surprised to see that the vultures did not show any signs of fear when approaching the birds. Instead, they were prepared to attack the group. The vultures turned on the rescuers, sending their beaks and talons in the group's direction before they could blink. People ran to a safer distance because they feared losing an eye or damaging some body part. Frightened by what had happened, they panted heavily. Rascal sat calmly in his cage and watched everything happening in front of him as the vultures and rescuers paced back and forth. Rascal's unflappable attitude towards the situation surprised people. The group was determined to pursue the dog despite the surprises and setbacks. The rescuers realized that it was necessary to use a new strategy to attract Rascal's attention. Before long, their determination gave them another idea. One person in the group reminded them of Rascal's favorite can of food that they had brought during the search. They were almost sure that the tempting smell of the can of food would attract Rascal's attention when they opened it. Even after smelling the aroma of his favorite food, he remained in his seat, much to Rascal's surprise. This negatively affected the group. Their hopes that the dog would run towards them after smelling the smell of the food were dashed. However, they realized that the smell had caught someone else's attention. The group realized that the smell of the food was attracting the attention of other forest animals because they suddenly realized that the longer they kept the can open, the more they saw animals like birds coming out of the undergrowth. The group felt paranoid and began to hear the howling of wolves. With great fear in the air, they made the decision to close the jar to avoid attracting a group of terrible animals that could harm them. They had no choice but to invent a new tactic to get Rascal's attention. The good news was that Matt, the unofficial leader of the group, soon had a new idea. Matt implemented the tactic quickly. He received the can of food and threw it near Rascal. The action did not attract Rascal's attention as much as they had anticipated. However, luckily, he caught the attention of the vultures, who flew at high speed towards him. Finally, Matt had the opportunity to approach Rascal. It was quite safe to run towards Rascal now that the vultures were finally gone. The man ran quickly towards Rascal, picked him up, and returned to his hiding place because time was running out, because the vultures would return in a matter of seconds. Matt thought he had managed to rescue Rascal, but this was not true because Rascal did not let himself go. Despite my expectation that the dog would be very happy to have contact with humans again, the opposite turned out to be the case. The dog began to behave aggressively and even tried to bite Matt's arm. In the end, it took 2 more men to keep the dog alone. In the end, they had something else to worry about. The vultures realized that Rascal was no longer in the cage when they ran out of cans of food. Matt and others hoped the vultures would care more about the location than the dog. However, it was not as expected. The group was surrounded by a large swarm of vultures. They seemed ready to gouge out their eyes if necessary, while screaming. Matt had to make a decision quickly, but he knew he had numerous options. He made a painful decision without knowing if he had made the right choice. There was really no other option but to go down to Rascal. If they had fled with the aggressive loon, either the dog would have escaped or the vultures would have caught up with them quickly. Although there was a possibility of combating the vultures, there were also risks. Matt made the decision to free Rascal before the birds reached them. The dog quickly ran to the white cage and sat in the same place where they had found him when he fell to the ground. Matt took a closer look as the vultures gathered around the cage instead of chasing them. The group was surprised. Although the situation already seemed disconcerting, what happened recently only increased the uncertainty. Why did that cage attract so many vultures? However, the main question remained: how could they free Rascal from this place? Matt decided it would be best to stay where they were now. Night would soon arrive, and it is possible that the situation would change. At some point, Rascal would fall asleep, and he couldn't conceive of those vultures staying all night. As night began to fall, Matt and the group made the decision to light a bonfire. Because the day had been long, they made the decision to take turns observing. Therefore, there was always someone who could watch Rascal and check if the vultures were escaping. Matt's prediction was correct, and Rascal quickly fell asleep. He lowered his head after climbing a little higher in the cage. The story of the vultures was completely different. Matt was right about the dog, but not about the vultures. The situation was completely opposite. At night, the vultures became more active. The only advantage was that they didn't have to stay in the cage, but instead climbed a little further into the nearby trees. Although Matt thought the vultures were probably looking for food, someone in the group said that vultures don't hunt at night. It seemed that they were no longer paying attention to the cage and the Rascal. Maybe the dog was sleeping, or maybe they were too tired to stay. There was still a chance for the rescue operation. Matt and other members of the group did everything they could to be prepared for the ideal moment. They had 2 cans of food ready to throw a little further away from the cage so that the vultures and Rascal would separate. When the cage was full of vultures, they decided that this was the best opportunity for them. They opened the boxes of food and threw them to both sides of the cage as far away as possible. Matt whispered, "It's now or never." As before, the vultures and some birds that had just flown rushed towards the jars. The vultures began to eat with their heads lowered and only their eyes to eat. The pair moved slowly but silently towards the cage. Matt quietly lifted the cage door without waking Rascal, who was sleeping. When Matt returned to their seats, the group had already gathered his belongings and were ready to leave. To ensure everyone returned as quickly and safely as possible, they divided the work clearly. They were well prepared and had a compass and a map to get home. It was very difficult to find the way because it was still quite dark. Also, they wrote to Miriam, but she's probably still sleeping. They managed to arrive on time, and until the sun began to rise again, the return was quite comfortable. Fortunately for the group, the vultures that seemed very interested in the cage did not chase them. What was really inside the cage? Rascal woke up when the sun appeared through the cage door and realized something was happening. They heard him move, but he didn't seem as aggressive as he had before. How is it feasible? Could it be related to him now being in his safe cage? They could finally get a good look at both Rascal and the cage now that it was light and they were away from all the vultures. They took him out of the cage and examined him for injuries. He became stressed again and seemed to want to return to the cage. They examined the cage closely and detected movement.